everyone. Welcome to this webinar on building resilience for career burnout. Specifically, we would like to address the elephant in the room, which is that resilience isn't just all about self-care, but we also need to address how we work and how organizations can take a more proactive approach towards building well-being into the organization. So I'm Kelly Huang. Welcome to this webinar. And I want to make sure that I'm going to get to the housekeeping next, but just want to make sure that you know that you can ask questions at any time, and we're going to capture that in the chat. So we'll leave room at the end to make sure to capture all of your questions. But if somehow we don't get to it, make sure to stay connected with us, and we can be sure to answer that. Okay, so in terms of housekeeping, we're going to wait for a little bit for everybody to join us. But for all of you, the microphones and videos are disabled since this is a webinar, but we will be capturing your questions through the chat. And also, as I said, if somehow we don't get to all of your questions, be sure to use either this QR code you see here, or also the URL, the LinkedIn URL is also there as well. It's linkedin.com/resilience for burnout. So in today's agenda, we're going to get to understanding more about burnout. And in particular, this has become an epidemic to the point where that WHO actually has, called it out in terms of this is something that's happening worldwide. And also, we wanted to make sure we get to the point about the business case of well-being, because not only and I'm going to get to this later on, organizations have been built around performance and output, and we're here to basically kind of help you rethink, that might not be the best thing for us humans, especially with AI coming on our heels. So well-being as a goal is what we're talking about here in terms of building the business case. And also we want to talk about the science of well-being. And this is actually a well-researched topic. So it's not like it's something that's, because of the burnout, people are starting to research well-being. It's been a well-researched topic. So we're going to get to that. And then we also want to discuss how resilience can be best used in action. So there's a case study we're going to share with you. And then lastly, we definitely want to get to how companies and organizations can have best practices going forward in order to build in well-being into everything that they do. So we are the Resilience Burnout Duo. So you can read about us in the LinkedIn separately about each of our background, but I do want to tell you the stories of how we came together. Coach Aparna and I met through Genesis Advisors, which is the company that does first 90 days coaching. But in addition, she and I also went through the positive intelligence training, which came out of Shirzad Shamin out of Stanford. But even more so, I think she and I both feel very strongly about serving the marginalized communities that she and I have both belonged to and also now work in. And in fact, I just came back from an inclusive leadership conference out of California Life Sciences, where we're still discussing the blowback on DEI and how companies can stay committed to DEI. And Coach Aparna is actually off to Tanzania to talk about Women's Health Lift. And that's a global conference where all these healthcare practitioners are coming together. And she specifically is going to, actually, I'll let her tell it, the emotional intelligence panel. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, no, thank you, Kelly. So I am going to Tanzania, very excited, woohoo. It is an organization called Women Lift Health, really working to empower, women leaders in top leadership positions. And my workshop is going to be on emotional intelligence and how to leverage EI to lead change with resilience, coming back to really like full circle, the topic that we're discussing today and building resilience.
Yeah. So as the airline PSA, public service announcements always say, like, take care of your oxygen, take care of somebody else's. So in today's burnout discussion, that's what we're going to start, right? Start with your own and individuals' awareness of burnout and what those symptoms could be. And then from there to hopefully help you transform into that catalyst, right? To help the companies prioritize well-being and think about how you can build that into your organizations. Anything else, Aparna, you want to add?
No, I think, again, the goal of the webinar is for participants to leave thinking about what they can do as far as strategies go. But also, if you're in that role, a leadership role where you can actually influence policy, think about what will work for your organization as a first step, and really being mindful of it as you listen to the webinar and engage with us.
Perfect. Okay. All right. So in terms of burnout, I want to start with how I mentioned already, WHO has already highlighted the fact that burnout is an epidemic. And it isn't just about feeling tired or having a bad day, but in fact, it's a state of emotional, physical, and mental exhaustion. And that's because of prolonged exposure to chronic work-related stressors. So it is a global issue. There's been more and more, big and small organizations, right, highlighting it. And a recent 2019 Gallup study actually indicated that 76% of healthcare workers are experiencing burnout at some point. I mean, that's 3 out of 4 people. That's a huge percentage. And even in the business world, when you think about startups, finance, all those competitive pressures, layoffs can really contribute towards burnout. So that's why we want to, really highlight that in this webinar and also discuss what can be done, right? So, Aparna, I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah. So maybe just to sort of wrap up, Kelly already addressed this, but just to think about this, as human evolution has taken place over the centuries, certain physiological responses to stressful stimuli, like seeing a predatory tiger, hearing, sounds of leaves ruffling that could potentially be a poisonous snake, these were meant to enable swift responses in defense, right? To either stay and fight or run as fast as you can in the opposite direction, which is take flight. Now that's considered necessary, or it was necessary and beneficial. So it was an acute response to an acute stressor from something that was warranted. But you fast forward to today, we seem to be seeing tigers everywhere around us and 24/7. So think about that. Our protective responses are on constant overdrive, and the end result being complete depletion of emotional, physical, and mental resources, aka burnout. Right? So it's something again to think about. How are we being mindful of some of the reactions that we have and some of the emotions that we hold on to, as we kind of navigate through change and stressors in life in itself.
Yeah, so we want to hear what you think, just in terms of which of these 3 dimensions, right? Whether it's emotional exhaustion or depersonalization or that reduced personal accomplishment, which of these 3 can you most relate to? And feel free to put that into the chat and we'll kind of get a sense of where everybody's coming from. And thank you for sharing that, Aparna. Recently, I saw a graphic about how even when you think about driving your car, right? Usually you want to put in the gas before it's empty. And then in terms of burnout, what I've seen time and time again, people are like beyond the E, right? They're even beyond running on the fumes. And as you said, Aparna, if you had put it in at before the E, what would that have been like?
Exactly. I mean, again, going back to awareness is the best place to start with. Going back to why you and I do this is really having individuals recognize that some of the emotions they're experiencing could be, sort of like, it's a ticking time bomb. It's there, and you can do something about it.
Right.
So once you know, you can.
Right. Okay, I'm going to stop there and then, and go into the next slide.
All right. So we're going to just spend a few minutes talking about the development and burnout, very much related to what we said earlier, that it all starts with awareness, right? So understanding that burnout just doesn't happen overnight. It evolves over time. Now, one of the most well known models that describes burnout and its development is the five-stage model proposed by psychologists Herbert Freudenberger and Gail North in the 1980s. So, I mean, this has been in evolution and people have been researching this for a while. The model outlines the fact that there's sort of a gradual progression of burnout through five stages. Having said that, I think the caveat is they've described it as gradual, but depending on your level of resilience or just how well equipped you are, this could be very slowly drawn out, or it could actually be very, very quick. So it's important to be mindful of that. The first stage of burnout is the honeymoon phase, and I'm sure, Kelly, you and I can relate to this when early onset of our careers or in a role that we're really excited about getting into. Individuals typically here are very enthusiastic. They're highly motivated about their work or a particular project, and they'll invest a lot of time and energy willingly, right? Again, it's willingly, often to the detriment of their personal lives. So this phase is really marked by high levels of energy and commitment. Sometimes that sounds so counterintuitive. We're talking about burnout, but here we go, high levels of energy. It's again, you've got a full fuel tank at this stage, but your foot's really down on the accelerator and you're going fast. Okay, you're going fast. And then you move into the onset of stress. So this is where the honeymoon phase kind of continues. The demands and stresses of the job become a little more apparent, and that we know, right? You get into the job. We coach around the first 90 days. After 90 days, it's like, okay, you're here, start functioning. And individuals start to really experience some physical and emotional symptoms like stress, fatigue, bit of irritability, anxiety, workload, expectations, and other job-related pressures really start to begin to now take a toll. But remember, foot still on the accelerator. You're going fast. You haven't really slowed down. Then you move into a state of chronic stress. So stress becomes really, it's there in your life almost on a day-to-day basis. Individuals start to notice a significant decline in their physical and mental health, right? Because you're now getting really tired. They experience a persistent sense of exhaustion. And that's when the cynicism starts to kick in. When we talked about the second and third stages of burnout, and they're starting to get a little detached. So the question is, like, why am I doing this? Oh gosh, where's the reward for this? What's the purpose? Why am I doing this? And when the foot's coming off the accelerator because they just can't press it down anymore, but the fuel tank is also now really on depleted state, but they feel like they have to go very far. They move into the burnout crisis phase where, they've got full-blown burnout. They're feeling overwhelmed. They're feeling emotionally depleted. They're feeling completely detached from their work to the point where it really significantly affects their performance in personal life. And this is also a critical stage where individuals start to consider whether they need to quit their job or make a significant life change. Now, think about the implications, first for the individual, but also for organizations when we talk about, high turnover, like what's causing people to quit and leave. And finally, for those who haven't really quit just yet, they move into habitual burnout or the point of no return. And this really is that final stage where they experience a complete mental and physical breakdown, often resulting in serious health problems, and the individual is often unable to work. Now, this is not about even a choice of wanting to not work. They actually just can't work. And recovery can take extended periods of time, including medical treatment and psychological therapy. Again, implications on both the individual and the organization, right? So this really is, once again, recognizing that burnout is an evolutionary process. And when you see that there are these different stages, you've got to start being mindful of, okay, am I really in the honeymoon or the onset of stress? Could I potentially be in chronic stress? What should I be doing at this stage? Okay, we can move to the next slide. So there's a lot of research, published on drivers of burnout. I mean, again, we've alluded to how it's important as far as the consequence goes to both the individual and the organization. But when you think about what is it that predisposes us to burnout, you can look at it in three major dimensions. One is at the individual level, second being at the team level, and the third being at the organizational level. If we look at the individual level, there are certain behaviors, belief systems, types. Some identify with like type A personalities or whatever, that tend to feel very driven. Again, going back to that very high energy phase, they're very prone to doing way too much. But that can really lead you down that path of burnout. So, perfectionism is one big thing that drives burnout. The second thing is a dissonance between purpose and task, right? So, I can bring in again the story of what happens in healthcare today. You are involved in healthcare because you're so passionate about wanting to serve human beings. You want to be there to care for them, but then at the same time, you're being asked to get them through like a factory line, right? You got to have patients come in very quickly and go. You don't have enough time to emotionally connect. You're even told not to emotionally connect in some instances. So that dissonance between purpose and what you end up having to do day to day predisposes you to burnout. Imposter syndrome is a big thing, right? You show up in a new role, you wonder whether you're deserving of it. You try and overcompensate by trying to do too much. You're not you're you tend not to go and ask for help because you think you need to have all the answers. And as a result, once again, you drive yourself to the other extreme opposite, and you're likely to get burnt out. And of course, there's fear of stigmatization. Again, I can bring this up in healthcare where you're told to be tough. You're not, you're not. We don't often share the emotional struggles that we go through because you're supposed to know how to do it. You're supposed to be able to keep it all together in tough times. But for how long can you do it? And that again drives you to burnout. Moving to the team level, lots of research once again published to talk about toxic cultures that drive burnout. So if you feel like there isn't enough trust amongst your team, who do you kind of lean on to during difficult times? Who are you competing with constantly? Are you worried in your head that someone's going to take all the credit for everything that's happening? So, again, that toxic culture, and when it's consistent over a long period of time, drives burnout. Of course, the lack of autonomy and control. So, again, you're working within a team, but there's some level of micromanagement going on. Your team leader doesn't want to give you, first of all, the tools that you need to succeed, and the expectation is very, very high. Again, you're more likely to drive into burnout. And of course, again, going back to unclear roles and responsibilities. I've worked across teams, worked on group assignments. I sometimes work with students who talk about that, and say it's so tiring when we don't know what we're doing. So either we're doing too much work, we're reworking things, it's just so inefficient, once again driving burnout. And finally, at the organizational level, where there is this imbalance between capacity or resources versus demand, right? There's so much to be done, too little time, very little resources. How do you make it all happen? And of course, when you don't have leaders being effective sponsors, that becomes challenging as well. So you're working really hard, but you don't have someone who can sponsor you or help elevate you, as because everyone's working hard to do better. We're all showing up to do good work. And again, that micromanagement component, right, and lack of autonomy, that filters also at a much broader organization level. Of course, relentless change. It doesn't help. You talked about, Kelly, AI. AI being one thing, there's already been, we look at the last 50 years, the amount of technological change that's happened is enormous. And we're all expected to show up and learn something new every day. We're learning, brains are doing the hard work. So again, relentless change, which isn't very well thought out or implemented with the right support, can drive burnout significantly. Do you have any thoughts here, Kelly, that you'd like to, any input from your experience?
Yeah, I think when I think about the culture, right, which can really affect people. So even though the individual may not be in burnout, but when they are part of a team where it's 24/7, texting all the time, right, where the leaders kind of set that example, it's kind of inevitable. Like even if you're not in burnout, you're part of this burnout culture. And then
Yes.
same thing as you said, organizationally, even if the teams are effective and the individuals are doing well, the organization having to deal with whether it's layoffs or, as you said, technology disruption or geopolitical tensions, that all adds to the multiplier effect, right? In terms of how everyone's impacted. Like it's hard to escape it, in fact, if I look at it, right? In terms of how you, even if you yourself are not in stages of burnout, there's this contagion, right? Whether it's
Absolutely.
team level or the organizational level that can impact you.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing as well, and I should have probably mentioned first when we talked about organizations, is sometimes they don't have enough wellness programs, but
Mhm.
sometimes organizations have wellness programs that haven't been thought out very much in addressing actually what their people want. And this goes back to something that we're going to, ask our participants as well to chime in saying, how many times has your organization reached out to you to say, what do you need?
Yeah.
What will work for you, as opposed to just prescribing a generic solution
Mhm.
under the umbrella of well-being. So that is again a very important factor when addressing burnout as well. Just, I'd say again, incongruent responses, all right, to well-being initiatives.
And next is talking about the cost of burnout, right? And so what we've seen, and you probably have seen it firsthand, we talked about that already, where whether it's at the individual level or the team level or even organizational level, to turn things around, if you are able to kind of quantify the burnout, you can see that replacing employees very expensive, right? Engagement is at its lowest at many organizations. Um, Healthcare costs is sky high, and then culture wise too, right? You probably have heard that culture eats strategy for breakfast, or um, having a healthy culture is how you're going to take care of your employees and retain them and giving them a purpose to come back day in and day out. And so disengage employees, right? You can kind of envision what that looks like. You probably have seen it firsthand. That can really also have a multiplier effect, as we said earlier, right? About the individual and the team and then the organizational level. In terms of prioritizing well-being, just in terms of benefits, right? You can see that it's going to improve employee health. It's going to help us with engagement and morale, and then definitely reducing absenteeism. You probably have heard of quiet quitting. So that's another form of absenteeism, right? Even though they're at work, their mind and heart are not, right? And so, yeah, that presenteeism is probably a good way to describe it. And longer term, you can see that well-being can develop this, can be like essential to the culture, right? Where employees' well-being is highly valued. You can integrate well-being into the values, the policies, and the practices and behaviors, right? You want to implement at the team and at the organizational level. And then furthermore, you can help with recruitment and retention if you have a healthy well-being culture. And then lastly, this is where sustainability comes in, right? If you have this virtuous cycle of people that want to show up for work, that want to help each other, that double down on building relationships, that's going to keep, the retention going and keep the engagement at a higher level, right? As you continue on this path. Okay, next slide. So also in terms of productivity gains, what we see, and I can probably have you read it yourself. I mean, there's all kinds of improvements, right? And maybe most importantly, I want to highlight the last piece about every dollar invested in wellness programs, the medical cost in parallel drops by $3.27, right? So a three times multiplier effect. And the absenteeism, in addition, is about the added benefit is another $2.73. So you can see that's almost six times, right? Six times the benefit for every dollar invested in it. So definitely the business case is very strong in terms of how we should think about building well-being into the culture, into all of the pieces that I just mentioned. Okay, next slide. So back to the science of well-being, I mentioned already that it's built on the positive psychology that Professor Martin Seligman originated. And then there's also the positive intelligence that Coach Aparna and I have both gone through based on Shirzad Shameen's what I want to call EQ, right? Training and developing the self-awareness. So let me get into that. Next slide. So this is something that, both Coach Aparna and I have gone through in terms of thinking about the three muscles, right? Within positive intelligence, we call it, there's first the interrupting your saboteur muscle. So that's that survival brain, whereby our emotions, right, our self-limiting beliefs and some of our negative emotions get in our own way. And so that interrupter muscle is what we're trying to build. So whenever what we call the master judge or the inner critic, or maybe the judgmental parent or coach that you internalize, you'll want to find a way to kind of call it out, right? That's that first step. So interrupting that saboteur that you already internalized, or that master judge that's always, criticizing whether it's yourself or the circumstance or other people. And then the second muscle is that middle piece, the shifting the dynamic. So this is where we need to pause, right? And most importantly, I've seen many, many different mindfulness practices. So whether it's going out for a walk, putting up a timeout sign, or even just slow, deep breathing, right? Like to bring you out of that amygdala hijack and bring it into the middle and frontal cortex, right? This is that pause that we're talking about in terms of shifting the dynamic. And then lastly, the thriving brain. This is where we want to cultivate, as I said earlier, about the empathy, the innovation, the think outside the box, the improvising, the navigating, that we can do to better rethink and reframe the situation. So those are the three key muscles that we help our coachees work with, right? In terms of how to intercept, how to pause, and then going on to the positive, thriving brain. Okay, next slide. And the other way to look at it is that kind of root cause, right? The three muscles that I talked about, intercept and pause, and then the redirect. So I actually have some examples to share. I know that many of us probably are in deep fear of public speaking. And I know many, many speakers have told me, especially the ones that are really good at it, like it's not that they don't have the jitters. They all have the butterflies and the jitters, right? Or even that inner critic that says, oh, you're just going to bomb this. Oh, everybody's going to, feel horrible, nobody's going to take your advice. Why are you speaking up there, right? All that self-doubt creeping in. And so even as I said, the most polished public speakers, they all have it, right? So why are they different than us? It's because of these three things. So that energy can actually be pivoted or rewired into an excited energy, right? So first they notice that, oh, okay, my inner critic is speaking up, is talking at me. So calling it out, right? And then taking that deep breath, or whatever other rituals that you might do. I know Amy Cuddy talks about this, the Superwoman pose. That also helps, right? To turn the negative energy into that positive thinking, right? So intercepting and calling it out, be in the moment, have some mindfulness practice. So I know one speaker, she actually goes to the bathroom and just uses warm water and washes her hand very thoughtfully. So that gives her kind of the sense of her embodiment and to fully, right, be in the moment before she goes out on stage. And then lastly, right, as I said, those professional speakers, they found a way to redirect the energy, right? Those butterflies, we all have it, but to redirect the butterflies into an excited energy. So it shows up in their tone of voice. It shows up in how they present themselves in their body language. And then I know athletes do this too, right? Athletes also have the self doubts creeping in. They also feel like, oh my gosh, I'm never going to finish this, right? Marathon, or I'm never going to, perform the 10 out of 10 in gymnastics, as Simone Biles have experienced this. Those butterflies, right, creep in. But in training themselves to do the routines over and over, the flow takes over, right? Athletes have often talked about that flow stage. That's what they're aiming for. They're trying to train to the stage where their muscle memory takes over, right? So the inner critic doesn't have time to come in and and reduce them to something that they're not. So this is again what we're talking about here, to learn about those critics, call them out, intercept them through some sort of mindfulness practice such that we can redirect the energy positively, right? To be at our best. Aparna, do you have anything to
Yeah.
add to? Yeah.
No, that was really well conveyed, Kelly. And I just thought, another good way to also get people to think about what they can do differently is if you can identify with any of these, the survival brain overdrive triggers, and
Mm-hmm.
I can, for example, recognize with sometimes the high idealistic self expectation.
Mm-hmm.
So the moment you feel like you've kind of, it reminds me of when I was trying to become a coach. It was like I was starting to discount everything else that had
Mm-hmm.
led me up, led up to this point in time, and to convey this transition of moving into coaching, I felt I needed to do 20 other things to feel like it would be okay and that I would be accepted. Again,
Mm-hmm.
discounting capability, baseline capabilities and strengths that I already had.
Right.
So for me, when that creeps in to say, oh, I'm tempted to go do yet another course because I think that's what I need to validate my expertise, then I have to move into intercept, which is for me, deep breathing is really, really useful. So taking a few really deep breaths to just calm that initial, heightened, almost restless energy inside,
Mm-hmm.
come back into a state of calm. And like you said, redirect with firstly some empathy for myself and saying, okay, I've done so much, recognize I've done a lot, right? And again, take stock of all the gifts I already have that I
Right.
can still start giving and sharing.
Right.
And then moving into that stage of now eagerness and wanting to show up and engaging with what I need to do. So I think it's really important to think about, once again, being very aware of what it is that tends to drive you to do sometimes the things which you look back at and say, why did I do that again? You know, because I was on autopilot, right? I always do this.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, you can shift.
Right. Right. Yeah. And then we do have some of those early childhood programming, right? And that's very much part of that positive intelligence training that Shirzad mentioned, that we have these early childhood experiences that let those emotions tell us that they're good for us, right? That perfectionistic tendency, that victimization, the hyper rational, facts are facts, knowledge is knowledge. Those kind of things in our early days probably did help quite a bit, right? To
Yeah.
help us become high achievers and high performers, or helped us through difficult emotions. But in fact, at an even higher level in leveraging our right brain, we can use that energy, right, to our benefit and not be caught
Absolutely.
up in it. All right, so next slide. Okay. So, in terms of insights into action, we know from being positive intelligence practitioners, the knowledge of what positive intelligence is all about, that's only 20% of the pie, right? Learning about what positive intelligence is, learning about saboteurs, learning about how you can, delve into these positive emotions. That's only the first part of that small piece of the pie. But the rest of the time, in terms of how mental fitness can really help us, is to build it into daily habits, right? To every day think about, okay, when did I intercept my victim saboteur? Or every day, when did I help somebody else not be triggered, right? And every day, how did you, leverage what you know about saboteurs or mindfulness moments and pausing, or leveraging your empathy and other people's empathy, right? To double down on relationships. So this is where that 80% comes in. How can we best, right, deploy it not only for ourselves, but also to become that catalyst, right? When you have more and more people who are right brain and positive PQ aware, you're definitely going to have a lot less, I would say, difficult conversations, right? Because people are in that right frame of mind to receive difficult feedback. People know that mistakes can be made. It's not about criticizing or shaming somebody, but it's in fact helping them learn, right? That growth mindset comes in. And then the intercepting part, right? Every day we have the opportunity to not only intercept ourselves. I know this is the case with bullying. If you can just kind of disrupt somebody in the process of about to say something really bad or about to really hurt somebody else, that's also where that bystander, right, can really help somebody who's feeling like they're not belonging to the place or they're being bullied or some negative emotions are really having a bad impact on them, whether it's at work or even outside of work. And then lastly, we can respond, right? We can respond and have that sustainability going. So in terms of the 80%, I know in positive intelligence, we as coaches, we help people think of ways, right, to develop this daily habit or to think of ways to improvise or to work around situations and not always have this binary thinking. So that's where we, as coaches can really help people think about how to cultivate that mental fitness and have the habit built into their daily work and also at home. Aparna, do you have anything to add on?
Yeah, I mean, I guess just to only say that, as Kelly mentioned, the more you do it, the more we repeat it and create habits, then we start to actually move up this virtuous cycle and you start to actually thrive. Because
Yeah,
that's the goal, right? When we talk about well-being, we're saying how do we get ourselves and those that are around us to move into a state of thriving. But that comes from repeated application. Just like anything else, you want to go to the gym and build a certain set of muscles, you go and you show up all the time and you do it over and over and over again, then you get to that state. So again, it's important to recognize that yes, all this insight is good, but what we really need to do is apply over and over again consistently to really see change manifest over a period of time.
absolutely. And Aparna?
Okay, so just as Kelly alluded to the individual state of resilience, and like she mentioned, Martin Seligman is the one who pioneered work around uh, resilience or well-being and created the PERMA model. And for those who are not aware, PERMA, there are 5 components to it. P being positive emotions, and this can of course be achieved through initiatives. Again, we're looking at the organization level, such as recognition programs, right? Appreciation events, creating a supportive and uplifting work environment. Going back to the initial discussion we had about tailoring what works. So when you also have an initiative like a recognition program or an appreciation event, try and figure out how people feel appreciated or would like to feel appreciated. But that is really important because it does trigger positive emotions. It's very important. The other thing organizations need to think about is engagement. So again, engagement meaning encouraging autonomy, right? Providing tasks where individuals feel like it's challenging and they're growing from it, and promoting opportunities for development, right? Because without a sense that we're moving from one place to the next and we're not growing, there isn't as much of intrinsic motivation to engage with something. So once again, planning those employee development programs appropriately and mindfully. Third is building strong relationships. This is particularly important, again, looking at the fact that we're working in a hybrid environment or remote environment. Like, how do you find avenues to really forge strong relationships? And again, between leaders and employees as well, right? This is not just about the team out there working that are sort of connecting with each other on a day-to-day basis because they're working on tasks, but how do you also get leaders to engage and create those strong relationships and a sense of trust and a sense of deep belonging? Meaning, we addressed this earlier as well, right? So trying to align the organization's mission and values with the employee's personal values. Sometimes, I mean, this is a big thing that's brought up in hiring as well, is to try and assess, right? And ask some questions to understand, are our values really aligned? And how can you, again, try and tailor work or place individuals to do the things that they feel allow them to work within their flame. That's really important. They must feel like they're doing something impactful. And when they feel that they're making a difference, they're more likely to also bring in that discretionary effort where needed. And of course, sharing that with society, what's been done, that's another important thing. And of course, accomplishments. So we talked about how appreciation programs are really great and positive emotions, but recognizing employee contributions is very important. Feedback is such an important skill in this respect, right? When we talk about giving positive feedback or providing feedback, or or recognizing good job done, rather than stopping at, oh great, you did a great job. Why? What in specific did you find was really great about what that how that job was executed, or how that person showed up, right? Moving away from personal attributes to more of like the outcome of what they've done. And again, tailoring that same lens into employee and professional development programs as well, because this does so much to boost morale and motivation. So I really hope that for those who are attending, like I said, it's either you as the individual, or if you're in a position to effect some kind of change within your organizations or contribute to wellness and well-being, then think about what aspects of PERMA can you start with. Which one? Is it maybe the P or the E, the R, the M, the A? You don't have to do them all together. It's in fact not advisable to try and change too many things, because that means you aren't really, I think, doing the background work to understand what's needed. So first do some groundwork, figure out what people want, how they will feel appreciated, and then tailor one important and impactful initiative to boost well-being.
Right. All right.
That's
So
me.
I'm here to share a case study, right? I know from that latest inclusive leadership conference I went to, I know the BIPOC community are tired. They're tired and exhausted. Why? It starts with what we call code switching, right? Where you're showing up in a space where they don't look like you, they don't share the same culture, and you're having to kind of adapt, right? To fit in, to do that culture fit. And it takes energy. Again, the elephant in the room, to do that, right? To dress a certain way, speak a certain way, to make sure that you're not stepping on any toes, to make sure that when you're being your authentic self, that people aren't going to take offense. So that is number one, right? In terms of how the BIPOC employees I came across at the in the audience, I myself included, have found that it's it's additional work. So imagine all the workload you have, and then you're still having to do the covering or the code switching. Next is the microaggression. So I've heard a good description of this. This is like death by 1,000 paper cuts. So one day is some slang you use that people don't like. The next day is, oh, maybe your hair is not professional enough. And the next day is, oh, you said something to a colleague where their feelings were hurt. Their white fragility. Feelings were hurt, right? So that can lead to that, death by 1,000 cuts in terms of microaggressions. The third one is, I think correlates pretty closely with the covering and code switching. When you don't feel like you belong, it's very exhausting, right? To show up every day for work. Because back to what we said about purpose, aligning your purpose. If you're feeling like the culture is not aligned with your own upbringing or culture, or even the purpose, right? The purpose of the company or the team is very divergent from how you were raised or growing up. That can also lead to that sense of lack of belonging. And then lastly, what I've seen time and time again, the women of color leaders I know, they're doing a lot of emotional labor, especially during COVID, right? They're the ones checking in on everybody. They're the ones, making sure everybody feelings, right? All those difficult feelings are being addressed. And then at the expense of that, they're not taking care of themselves. And so we said that earlier, right, about burnout. They might be doing all of this. They're code switching. They're dealing with the microaggressions. They're feeling that lack of belonging or lack of alignment with purpose. And then they're also doing all of that emotional labor. they're probably not realizing they're way past the E, right? Way past in terms of burnout and what Aparna had mentioned. Any reaction to that, Aparna? Also, I know you're a practitioner in this as well.
No, absolutely. I think again, uh, I love when I say love it, death by a thousand paper cuts is so true. Going back to what happens every day over a period of time,
Right.
which can be really, really challenging. I'm sure that most people of color, and I myself have experienced this as well. This exhaustion of having to show up in a slightly different way where you don't feel you
Mm-hmm.
can be very
Mm-hmm.
authentic
Mm-hmm.
yourself can be difficult, right? At the end of the day, you
Yeah.
take that veil down and you
Right.
move into a different mode, and that switching is very, very exhausting.
Right.
Again, why are we sharing this? So that you can be mindful and you can again tap into your empathy when you deal
Mm-hmm.
with someone who might be demonstrating some level of exhaustion, sometimes asking that question,
Yeah.
what's
Yeah.
going on, or what do you need,
Right.
can
Right.
make such a big difference.
Right.
So
Right.
yeah, I mean, I think you've really covered it very well, Kelly. I don't know that I can add very much except to say, like I said, can relate to it, can
Yeah.
relate to it.
Thank you for sharing that. And I want to say that recently in the news, it was Elmo actually. I think Elmo sent out the post that says, "Are you okay?" and got many, many responses and really helped again spotlight the mental health, right? The difficult situation that, everybody at all levels, children or adults, are
Yeah.
in. And that
Yeah.
really resonated with a lot of people. So in terms of what to do, I'm just going to cover this really quickly because the resource is here already in Harvard Business Review. So the women of color leaders, the BIPOC employees, how can managers better support them, right? And so the encouragement made here is make sure you are the one asking the question, right? That are you okay? Or even in social situations, right? To kind of check in on them, whether that's after hours or in a team meeting, make sure that they have visibility and make sure that their voices, and whether it's dissenting opinion or something that's not necessarily culture fit, that's still being heard, right? And also having the managers kind of give them that platform, right? To give that, giving credits. So Aparna mentioned that in the PERMA, giving credits, right? The people who are checking in on everybody, the people who are planning the events, the people who are bringing the birthday cakes for everybody. Make sure the credits are given, right? These office caretakers, these office emotional laborers are also, people that you should be recognizing, right? Not just back to what I had said at the very beginning about the results oriented, the performance oriented culture, very much just directs all the compliments towards who brought in the revenue, right? Who brought in the big client. But remember, along the way, there were a lot of people doing the labor, right? To get that person. And so you probably have always heard that, it takes a village, right? It takes a village for that salesperson to have brought in that big client. It takes a village for the team to have gotten to that next step. So remember to give those credits. Not shying away from candid feedback. Again, as I said earlier about how relationships are built over time, um, it might be like, you know, for the short term to just like quickly, cover over those difficult conversations, right? But in the long run, it doesn't help the person. So how do you give that feedback such that, not only they can improve, but also to the team, right? To let the team know everybody can help. Don't just, raise your hand at the very last minute or, when you're beyond past empty in your tank, right? Make sure that you give feedback and also let the person know like, hey, help is all around you, allies are all around you. Be sure to give them that sense of community. um, Checking for biases, I know this is a well-known topic, but again, you can always go back to continuous improvement and quality control. You can always improve. So even if you address gender bias, well, what else can be done, right? Or if you address cultural bias, what else can be done? If you address confirmational bias, what else can be done? And then lastly, even if people decided like this is not the place for them, give them the grace of being able to keep that communication channel open such that you can at least hear from them like, hey, this is what didn't work, or this is, where the organization or the team could have done some improvement. And so that's back to what I said about the growth mindset. There, there are always ways, right, to do things better. So on their way out, hopefully you can keep that channel open so that there are ways for organizations to improve. So in terms of your insights, we would love for you to chat in. What are some things that can really boost your well-being based on what you learned today? And then secondarily, how about the organizations? Where can organizations start to promote well-being or build the resilience that we've talked about today? We would love to hear from you, whether, you want to chat that in or let us know. Yeah, let me put up our email. So we'd love to hear from you, whether that's from today or, you have some light bulb moment. We'd love to hear from you via email. And then lastly, I also want to share, next slide, that here's how you can continue to stay in contact with us. So on our LinkedIn page, the Resilience for Burnout page, you can search for, or using our QR code right here or the URL. Or also we are available through these discovery calls. So on Calendly, you can look for coaching for burnout, just like our Gmail moniker. Look for us to build that, to set up that discovery call. And then lastly, feel free to contact us at our Gmail. Aparna, any other concluding thoughts? And then we definitely want to make sure we have time for the question and answer. But yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. No, again, like we said, insight is only 20%. The rest of it is action. So as you think about what you could do, what could work for you or your organization, take it a step further. A lot of times we have the best of intention, but there's something that gets in the way. Being mindful of that as well. When there is a nudge, could be a thought of, oh, I've tried this so many times. This is most likely not going to work. Ask yourself, where's that thought coming from? And again, we talk about the redirection. What would happen if we turn that pessimism or cynicism into something that was exciting, optimistic? Because optimism is really important, and I think the world needs hope. We may be in a difficult place, but it is not beyond our control to change our outcomes, and again, influence those around us to be catalysts for change as well. So we would really love to hear from you, have this conversation going. The reason why Kelly and I do what we do is because we want to be catalysts for that change. We want to spread awareness, and we want to grow together. So we might have a certain amount of insight. There's so much knowledge and experience out there that we would love to tap into. So really, we encourage you to be in conversation with us and support our journey as well as we go ahead. And we wish you all the very best.
Thanks for that, Parna. And yeah, I just want to, that's kind of my parting thought too, that you may think you're this cog in a giant machine, but in fact, you do matter, back based on everything that Aparna has said and what we learned in positive intelligence and positive psychology. You do matter. We all matter. We all have a way to make an impact. So I hope that's the lesson you take away from today, that you can be that catalyst and you can start with yourself with some of the changes that we mentioned. And then we look forward to, getting all of the PQ firing, right? All around us. How great would that be? And that's my hopeful thought for today.